We can't stop them what they want to do, even not with sanctions. This doesn't work, so there's no other way than to join them. There's a really tremendous change going on, which is probably changing the world in a way that we haven't seen it for centuries, actually. So Jack Ma became such a rich man thanks to the government regulation. I don't see this kind of decoupling. I see a lot of political fight. I don't really see a war around about Taiwan, because that's not in the interest of the United States.
Thanks for coming onto the show, Frank Sieren. You are a book author and commentator for Chinese innovation, technology, and geopolitics, I should say. And you're really my go-to person when I look for a second opinion by a China expert. That's why I'm really happy that you took the time to come to our audience, speak to our audience on our channel today, because I think you always have a very balanced perspective. That's also what I really like about your views. You have been writing like a couple of different books, Zukunft China, so that's Future China, and the other one is about Shenzhen. And before I talk too much in my words, let us hear from your side directly who you are and what has motivated you to write those two books in particular.
Yeah, I've written quite a few books on China, and I've written these books because China is interesting. I'm living in China for now almost 30 years, and every morning I still wake up curious, and I want to know how it's going on, the growth of China. And as long as I'm waking up curious every morning, I'm going to stay in China, and I'm going to write more books. And I basically try to observe what's going to change. And actually, I think there's a really tremendous change going on, which is probably changing the world in a way that we haven't seen it for centuries, actually. And what I can observe is that the minority of the West, in the colonial times, it was more Europe, and then in the second half of the 20th century, United States took over. The West, the minority of the West, is not able anymore to basically implement or even dictate the global rules on the majority of the world, but the majority is getting stronger and stronger. And their leader is China, the biggest rising country, and they're more and more develop their own ideas, their own systems of how the world, the new world order, the new multipolarian world order should look. And to observe this fight, this debate about different views, that's quite interesting.
Right, and that's also an interesting perspective, because if we look into our media, I would say the general narrative is more like, China is descending right now, and we hear about the collapse of China many times, and that's also something which I found interesting about your person. In the past, I think you have also been quite critical of China's development, but then those two books that I've mentioned are, shedding a different light on China as more innovative, or also as a future superpower in some sort, right?
Yes, it's not so much about critical and not critical in a basically simple way. It can be very critical to observe the strengths of your competitor. It's a way of being critical as well, because it basically shows your weaknesses. And my observation is that we spend too much time to look at the weak spots of China, and then we forget to identify the strengths of China, and then we're surprised that China is continuing to grow, that it's getting stronger and stronger. And we were actually focusing so much on the weaker spots that our conclusion was it's not going to last long. But at least in the last 30 years, it was different. And it was actually in a way different that nobody did really foresee the way of development, the speed of the rise of China, let's say in the 90s or the beginning of the new century. So, and probably we need to learn from this. Probably we need to see there is a certain strength within these rising countries, and it's not only China, it's actually all over Asia. And they just 1 year ago, they opened up the biggest free trade zone worldwide, and they are growing, and they don't have the feeling that the world is collapsing. They don't have the feeling that the old order is not staying, but everything is falling apart. They have the feeling that they have more to say, that they have a bigger saying on world affairs. And for many countries, and even China, for a long time, they have the feeling that they can choose. And that's actually a very, very important point. They can choose between different partners. They're in the position to look for the best deal for themselves, and they don't anymore have to take what they get from the West.
Interesting. Okay, so this is also really taking the Asian perspective on things. I would maybe let me mirror.
It's actually not only the Asian perspective,
Yeah.
it's the perspective of all rising countries. Let's talk about Africa, South Africa. They just had, in 1 week, they had a Russian visitor, the Russian foreign minister. They had the foreign commissioner of the EU, and they had Janet Yellen, the finance minister of the United States. And suddenly they're in the position that they can deal with all sides and can look for the best deal for their country. And that's even for South Africa. It's something very new, and for sure they like it. Whereas we are saying you shouldn't deal with the Chinese or the Russians, you should deal with us. But they don't do it anymore because they're in a better position the more choices they have.
So in our views, like the Western views, we basically saw China doing not so well during the last couple of months economically, during the lockdowns, for example, during zero-COVID policy. And so may I ask you, do you think or has your opinion changed about the things that you've described about, those the momentum of China becoming more of a growing power and nation, and also the innovation aspects that you, for example, describe about the city of Shenzhen? Has any of that really changed during what has happened in the last couple of weeks and months?
In a general long-term view, not. In a kind of, from a cultural point of view, yes, because I saw in Shanghai during the COVID lockdown how much of the cultural revolution mentality of the 60s is still within the people. That's modernization in China is still quite young. But on the other side, you have good reasons for the economic slowdown. One reason was COVID, but in the case of COVID, you don't really know which way was better. It's too early to say if the American or the European way was better, with a lot more dead people. We don't know the figures yet, but I'm assuming per capita that there will be much less dead people in China than in the United States, which had about 1 million people dying. The figures are not transparent, and the Chinese government can manipulate the causes of death, but they cannot so much manipulate the death rate. But you can't make people in a large scale disappear. So at the end of the year, we're going to know roughly which way was better. And from an economic point of view, you already have some hints that economically it was smarter to do it the way China did it, because we only have 2.5% inflation. The growth is low 3%, but it's still higher than it's going to be, especially in Europe. So therefore, I would say, okay, there were different ways of dealing with this pandemic. And let's say at the end of the day, there are different ways, and one or the others. It's not 100% clear that one was really better and the other was really worse. Probably there are different ways of dealing with it. And then at the same time, you had, by accidents, huge reforms taking place. One of the reforms was in the real estate market, where basically it was a big risk of overheating. And now they implement some measures to make sure that the overheating is becoming less likely than it was before. So basically the new rules are actually good for the markets, but the way the Chinese are implementing the rules, they are, let's say, a bit unusual for our Western perspective. There's a saying in China, you kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. And that's actually the way they do politics. And that's not the way we would do it. We would implement the civil society. There would be long discussions. There would be, then after a while, there would be new rules. In China, basically, they do it overnight. They take one chicken to scare the monkeys. This was Evergrande, a big real estate enterprise, big enough that everyone can see it, not so big that it's structurally important, that it can collapse the whole system. So, and then they show the new rules and in one example. So, and this was causing a lot of disturbance within the investors, within the home buyers. A lot of people were scared because their biggest assets in China by far is real estate. The stock market is not developed so far. So there was a lot of insecurity, and the people didn't buy new real estate. They were waiting and until the reforms are over. And basically now the government is saying the reforms are over and they're injecting new money into the markets. And now there should be a more stable real estate market. And as the people still have lots of money, they have lots of savings on one side, and there's a big demand on the other side of having flats, because there are 600 or 800 million people, they're still not in the loop. It's quite likely that the real estate market is going to develop further, and that the collapse many observers feared is not going to come. On the other side, the government is making sure that real estate is affordable. We had the same problem in Germany, for example, in the 70s. Real estate became too expensive. Then you had you had to build social housing. That's a normal way to react. It's the same way China is doing it. They force the developers to build more social homes, social housing, that people with lower incomes can still afford their homes. So my estimation is that the market is going to probably grow slower, but much more stable. And that's actually good news for investors, for stock investors on one side and for the homeowners on the other side. And the same thing happened in the tech market. There was a big problem with an enterprise we all know, Alibaba. The story was that Jack Ma was criticizing the government, and then they shut down the whole enterprise, or they basically punished the enterprise. Actually, the story was a bit different. First of all, we need to know that Alibaba only could become so strong because the government closed their borders for Amazon. So Jack Ma became such a rich man thanks to the government regulation. Now Jack Ma is a bit bored by his trading platform, and he was eyeing into the financial sector. And he actually developed a very, very smart business model of microcredits. But he was saying, I'm not a bank, I'm just a trading platform, so I don't have to follow the rules of the banks. But suddenly the government realized with Ant Financial, this is actually a business model which could easily control the whole financial system in China. And then the government was saying, okay, dear Jack, that was not how we thought things should go. Now you need to stop, you need to obey, you need to follow some rules. And then they were implementing basically rules to make sure that the monopoly of Alibaba is not becoming stronger, but that smaller players, other players can perform more easily. And you already could see this if you look at the competitors of Alibaba in 22, they are rising and Alibaba is not growing so much as they used to grow. The same happened with Tencent, another big player. So basically, the government was implementing antitrust rules, which I think is a good thing. And if you talk to international specialists, to antitrust lawyers, they're actually saying these laws are quite acceptable. They are on international level. All the provinces are including, so all the provinces are sending proposals for this law. And then they are baking a new law out of it. But again, they don't do it like we would do it. They don't have a civil society debate. They don't include everyone to discuss it. They do it basically backdoors, and then they act by surprise because they have the impression they only can change it if they act by surprise. If not, their enemies, so to say, they get too much time to fight against it. So, and I think the business of Alibaba is not over for a long time. So it's actually time to reinvest. The early investors already made about 30%, but I think it's far away from its peak.
Let me dive a little bit deeper into what you just mentioned about this decision-making process, because I think that's also a common fear of investors and observers, especially from the US, maybe about the process, how decisions are being made. And I think there's a common understanding now that we think the new administration in China with Xi Jinping and surrounded by yes men is not ideal for China's future in terms of how important reforms may happen. What is your view on that? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more, how new legislations are being made and proposed and who can decide what.
Basically, if you are in favor of free market without any regulations, then probably China is the wrong model. If you say a good market economy needs strong rules, then that's probably what you can see in China right now. Basically, there was a study of Patterson Institute in the United States, and their result was that there's no period of time than no other period of time where more privatization was done than under the leadership of Xi Jinping. Okay. So basically, the tough control of the civil society, which I don't accept, the censorship, which I don't like, the way dealing with people in Xinjiang, with minorities in Xinjiang, the way dealing with Hong Kong, which I don't like, it doesn't mean automatically that this is a planning economy. But the reality is, and that makes it so complicated, that you have both developments at the same time. You have more control by the governments in the areas of the civil society, and you actually have a better playing field for the market economy. And within the market economy, especially for innovation. That's a very, very important topic for the government, because China used to be a very, very important world power, innovative world power. And the Chinese understand they only can become a world power again if they are as innovative as they used to be 250, 300 years ago. And therefore, the government is doing everything to help innovation to grow. And the Chinese communists took them a long time, but now they're smart enough to see that they cannot be innovative by themselves. You cannot plan innovation in a way by state-owned mindsets. But they understand that they can set the environment of competition that makes it possible for innovation to develop out of competition. So basically, very simple what they are doing, they are providing innovation hubs. They give them money, they provide people, they provide infrastructure. And then they create a dozen of them. And then they say, now you need to know what to do. And now we want to see you being innovative. And then the best model is going to succeed. And if you're failing, tell us why you're failing. And if you have a good reason to fail, you get more money. China is not black and white. It's something in between. And for us in Europe, it's easier to understand in America. We understand that we have Silicon Valley and liberal San Francisco on one side, and then we have rednecks, we have the weapon lobby, we have the Trump followers on the other side. And again, this also exists in a much smaller country at the same time, and we kind of accept it. And I think we need to learn that it's kind of the same thing in China. And if we don't do it, then we're going to misjudge the Chinese development, and probably then we pick the wrong stocks.
And yeah, relating to that, which sectors would you say are of importance for China going forward to foster this innovation and growth that you've just outlined?
One obvious sector is everything connected to artificial intelligence. One very important of artificial intelligence is, or for artificial intelligence to learn, is that you need a lot of data to learn. And the more data you get, the faster artificial intelligence can learn. And China is a country with a lot of people creating a lot of data. One thing is, if you drive a car in a place like Austin, Texas, where you hardly see another car, or if you drive it in downtown Shenzhen, your autonomous driving car, which is one of the densest, most populated city in the world, there you're going to get a lot more data. Artificial intelligence is learning much faster, and that's how you're developing faster. So I think in terms of autonomous driving, China probably has already taken over the American developments, and there will be more fields where they are going to take over just because they're able to process more data in a quick time. Another field which is not so much on the agenda right now because it's not so obvious yet is the fact that the Chinese cannot eat as much meat per capita as the Americans eat. Therefore, the government is focusing very, very much on the sector of artificial meat. And actually, it's quite likely that it's going the same way like with the electric cars, that basically the government is forcing the markets to develop into this direction. And if you look around, you see a lot of venture capital firms right now building around this new topic. And already there's the first startup which is valued more than $100 million US in this area, and we will see a big market. And the interesting thing is that the Chinese do have a tradition of plant meat because of their Buddhist religion. And in former times, even 1,000 years ago, they were doing these dishes already. And now there are enterprises developing these old recipes into modern processed food. And this will be a very, very interesting development. And even the American enterprise like Beyond Meat, they are going to China because they're saying it's so difficult in the United States to get out of a certain niche. It's getting, it's so difficult to become mainstream if the government is not helping. And their hope is that they're going to go the same way like Tesla did in China. They are kind of the cheerleader of the Chinese development. And that's the only reason Tesla is allowed to the Chinese market, because they are basically making sure that the others don't become too lazy. And therefore, they get between 200 and 300 million US dollars of Chinese subsidiary as an American firm.
Interesting. And possibly another sector to look into would be the chips industry, I reckon.
Yes.
Where we also have lots of news lately about the US banning access for Chinese companies.
This is basically was not a really smart move. It was started by Donald Trump to ban actually the production of the most sophisticated chips for China. China is already able to develop these kind of chips, but they're not able yet to produce them. To produce them, you need European machines, Dutch machines, and you need American software. And basically, these machines and the software is banned for the Chinese market. And as a result, the Chinese government again, but also the private enterprises, they are doubling their efforts to be able to develop those machines and this software. So it's a setback for a few years, but then they're going to be even stronger, because it will be sure that they're going to develop their own software and their own machines. We don't know when. Normally, they deliver their results earlier than we're expecting. I would say it still takes a few years, but then they're much less dependent. So probably it would have been smarter to work together for a longer period, because now the Chinese know, okay, we don't need to work with the American and the European enterprises. And for the American enterprises and the European players, it's already, they're losing a lot of money. And they're not gaining it back in the future because China is becoming stronger and stronger. So therefore, it will be a tough time for China the next few years, but then they are much better off than before. And I have no doubt that they're gonna be able to solve this problem.
Interesting. So you still see a large role also of China tech, those tech companies, to play a role in overcoming some of these challenges and also driving, let's say, the reopening and the future growth of China. But would you say they're coming back to a similar level as before, like you've described them in your books?
It will be different because the ancient China was not interested in setting the rules for the world. They didn't care. They were the middle kingdom. They were saying, we are the center of the world and the others are barbarians. We don't need to take care of them. And because of this kind of arrogance, they basically underestimated the Industrial Revolution, and then the whole country collapsed. So basically, their idea is to become so innovative and that they don't have to fear competitors, and that they never get into a situation where they are run over by another countries because they are more innovative, and China is not really prepared for it. But, and that's very important, that they are just at the beginning of their innovative circle. Yeah, we're probably talking about a period which is longer than 100 years, and they're just in the warming up. And if you look in future developments, for example, new realities we are developing, and if you look at virtual realities, and if you look at the enterprises around the world, then you easily see that the best mixture to advance in this area is in Shenzhen and lies in an enterprise named Tencent, because they're already one of the biggest player in the gaming industry, and they have one of the biggest social media with WeChat, much more than a social media. It's basically an all life tool which solves all your problems. And if you mix this, then the result will be metaverse, and probably metaverse will much faster develop by Tencent than by metaverse.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about politics, because I know you're very familiar with this and a great commentator in this area. And I was interested in hearing your opinion about Xi Jinping going forward. What will be his role on the world stage? Will he be more outreaching and trying to make deals across the globe, now that, of course, he is also facing this issue that the US is trying to contain China in a way? Can this be successful? And, how will the setup of this new Chinese administration third term influence, let's say, maybe the pragmatism of Xi as a leader here?
Basically, the perspective of the government and Xi Jinping is very simple. They want to do what they want without any interference from the outside, if this is possible. You're always depending on others, but that's actually their goal. I don't think so much that they want to conquer the world. I have not the impression that they want to implement their political system on Europe or America. But they want to be strong enough that America and Europe especially can't tell them anymore what they need to do and what they don't need to do. And that's actually the goal. And if this, if from this perspective it makes sense to work together with other countries, they will do it. And they were actually saying that they're going to open their doors wider, but they're not going to open their doors following all our rules, but they're going to open their doors following their rules. And we need to accept it, and we need to deal with it, that they have a different perspective of how the world should look. They have a different order of values. Probably at the end they have pretty much the same values, but they have a different order. And the order is different because they have a different concept of the relation between the individual and the society. Basically, our Western systems are focusing very, very much on the individual, and the Asian political systems, more or less, even the democracies in Asia, focusing more on the society. And probably we need to focus more on the society, and the Chinese need to focus more on the right of the individuals. That's probably a way we can kind of meet each other. But one thing is clear: as soon as we want to force not only China, India as well, other countries, Indonesia, big country as well, biggest Muslim country worldwide, but also countries in Africa. If you want to force them, then they're not going to obey anymore. So our only way is to deal in this new world order is to convince them about our values and to explain why we have developed certain values like press freedom, for example, and why this is good on the long run. This is more difficult. It takes more time and than before. Before we could just force them, but that's the way it goes. And actually, the compromise is one of our strongest values. It's the idea of democracy is to find a compromise, is to find a common sense, is probably the better word. So, therefore, we need to accept that we, on a global level now, we need to find a common sense. It was actually the same development which happened in the 19th century with the aristocrats and the normal people. The aristocrats in Germany, in France, in England, well, they've been a minority setting the rules for the majority. And suddenly the majority was saying, ah, was nice, well, we have our own ideas. And then basically the aristocrats were fighting tough. They had a tough fight, but they were fading. They were losing power. And now we have the same kind of development on a global level. And what did the smart aristocrats do? They were working together with the rising people. They were opening up factories, they developed the economy, and that's basically what we need to do as well. We need to join the rising crowd. I don't see any other way. We can't stop them what they want to do, even not with sanctions. This doesn't work. So there's no other way than to join them.
So on the one hand side, you describe this new multipolar world with new value sets, and on the other hand, this what makes China also this closed system in a way, this walled garden that helps its technology companies also. What do you think in such a setup can be the role of China tech going outside and global? What will be the role of such companies, let's say like Alibaba, Tencent, or also the EV players like NIO and so on? Can they also bring their services overseas, or do you think we will be living in a world where every continent is kind of relying on its own tech?
I don't see this. It actually depends on us. Mm-hmm. So if we allow them to come, they're going to come. And we have already a lot of Chinese electric vehicles in Europe, and they are quite competitive. Okay, we could decide not to let them in, but then we would have a problem in the Chinese market as well. And only Germany is producing every year in China for the Chinese market products worth about 350 billion euros. So I think it's not quite likely that we say we don't let them in and we don't produce in China anymore. And we talking about the decoupling story. I don't see this. The Germans actually ordered last year goods worth about 50 billion euros more than the year before. For the simple reason they need more cheap products because the inflation is so high, they have less money in their pockets. So actually we're all talking about decoupling, but the reality is going in a completely different way. Enterprises like Volkswagen, but also American enterprises investing more in the Chinese market, in the Asian market. End of last year, all the big investment banks, they traveled to Hong Kong to get a piece, some share of the asset management market, and it's a huge market which is not really developed yet. Mm-hmm. So I don't see this kind of decoupling. I see a lot of political fight and a lot of political heat, because if you are a world leader like the United States and you have a competitor, you fight for your position. That's true. But even the Americans buy more products. There are taxes, there are sanctions, there are all kinds of regulation try to stop the Chinese selling more products to America, but it doesn't work, because if you have no money and you go to Walmart, you need cheaper products to survive. And the government, at the end of the day, they know it, especially in a country with a less developed social system than you have it in Europe. So therefore, I see actually a driving force which is connecting the world more and more. Mm-hmm. Hopefully there will be no war. That could be a big disruptor, but I don't see, for example, I don't really see a war around about Taiwan, because that's not in the interest of the United States. Simply because if China would invade Taiwan and the Americans would defend it, half of Taiwan would be destroyed. Mm-hmm. So basically the global economy would collapse. That's not in the interest of the United States. And the American people don't like anymore to fight at the other side of the world for so-called freedom, and they don't really know what's the result. America, the United States have a long stories of military interventions which not really worked well. We talk about Korea War, Vietnam War, Iraq 1, Iraq 2, Afghanistan, and so on. And the Chinese don't want to pay the price for the war, and they have seen how high the price will be. They have seen it in the Ukraine war. The economy, the Chinese economy works well, so they have no pressure to start a war. And actually, they could just cut off the electricity of all the Taiwanese enterprises on the Chinese market. And then the Taiwanese economy would collapse without one military plane flying there. So there would be more simple reasons or more simple ways to stop Taiwan. And the Taiwanese business people, they know it. So my impression, at the end of the day, there's a lot of heat and a lot of fighting, but both sides, at the end of the day, want to keep it like it is.
Interesting. So what would be, and that might be my last question for today's session, what would be your outlook for China as a rising power versus the United States? Because, for example, there are other factors like, for instance, demographics, where some commentators are basically saying, China may even not overtake the US as an economic power in the future. What is your outlook going forward?
I would say we don't know. Why we don't know? Because we don't know how much workforce we're going to need in 30 years. How automatization, how digitalization is going to work. There's, I don't know, but there's a possibility that China is quite happy to have less people because they don't need so many workers anymore. And they basically, all the production process is done by machines. Then you need to move all your people into the service industry, and probably consumption is then becoming more and more important. So it's actually much too early to say that there's a saying, China has to become rich before it becomes old. I'm not really sure. And China has still a big card to play, a very important trump to play, because they don't allow workers or immigrants from the neighboring countries or from foreign countries to move to China. So if they would become too old one day, it would be easy. They could do the same the Americans doing with the Mexicans. They don't do it now because they now still think the disadvantages are bigger than the advantages, and they have a lot of people. But if things getting worse and they really get into trouble, they just open their borders. And within 1 or 2 years, the problem is solved. Actually, we did the same in the 60s in Germany, or when we allowed people from southern Germany to immigrate to Germany and to do the work we didn't want to do it.
Well, what can I say? Thank you so much, Frank, for all of these insights and realistic views on many of the concerns of investors, global investors about China. I'm sure we may have a more deep discussion on some of these matters in the future. And it's great to having you as a guest here with your insights straight from China. Thanks again.
Thanks. See you soon.